There are 3 bills currently being considered in Belgium which would expand the scope of the euthanasia law even further. Under the present law on euthanasia in Belgium, a patient can make a written request for euthanasia if they are to later become incompetent. But that document, if it's to be acted upon, has to be no older than 5 years. The first legislative proposal that's being considered in Belgium at the moment would remove that time limit. And it would mean that a patient could be euthanized based on their recorded wishes as of 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 or 25 years in the past. And that presents a number of practical problems. What if the patient shows signs of distress as they're being euthanized? Is that to mean that it shouldn't be gone through with? Does that mean the patient's competent? Or if the patient's incompetent but they're showing signs of distress, should it nonetheless be respected? There are a myriad of practical and ethical difficulties with this proposal. But the proposal at its heart really demonstrates the illogicality at the heart of the Belgian law. A doctor is not usually trained to make those kind of assessments in a type of procedure which will end a patient's life. But even assuming that they are, how is a doctor to make that judgment call in the case of these so-called advance directives? How can a doctor, maybe a subsequent doctor who wasn't involved in the making of the advance directive, know that a patient's request at the time was well considered? How can that doctor be expected within their professional judgment to make a life-ending decision and know that that patient's decision was voluntary and that it was well considered? The second legislative proposal says that if a patient requests from a doctor euthanasia, that doctor would have to respond within 7 days as to whether or not they were able to assist them with that request. And if they're not, they have to refer to another doctor who's willing. And there are a lot of problems with that. First of all, it compromises the conscience of the doctor involved. It makes them complicit in something that in some cases they think is medically wrong or ethically wrong, or something that they have a conscientious objection to. Secondly, it's not good for the patient. It speeds up a life-ending decision in a way that can't be healthy. And then finally, it prevents a very, very important conversation from happening. And that's the conversation between a doctor who knows their patient and the patient themselves. Because we know from the example in Belgium that a significant number of people who request euthanasia initially change their minds. We've seen that in documentaries. A British filmmaker followed a 24-year-old girl in Belgium who had requested euthanasia. And it followed her decision-making process, it followed her consultations, and it followed her right up until the day when she was to be euthanized. And she decided not to go through with it that very day. And if that can happen, then it has to be very, very important for us to preserve the kind of free and frank exchange of views between a doctor that knows his or her patient and that patient themselves. But in this case, it takes that patient away from a doctor who might seek to have that important conversation at the earliest stage, and it reallocates the patient to a doctor who is more likely to support euthanasia and who's more likely to confirm the patient's initial request, even though we know that that initial request is often not the ultimate one. The third legislative provision is extremely opaque, and it's phrased in a way that conceals somewhat the real meaning of it. But diving behind that, what it in practice would mean is that no hospital, no clinic, no doctor's surgery is able to operate in accordance with its particular ethos. And so, of course, we have different organizations, we have different companies which have an ethos, maybe a humanistic or a secular or a religious ethos, and they're able to operate in accordance with those principles. Hospitals and clinics have the same option at the moment, but with this third legislative proposal, they would be deprived of that right when it comes to euthanasia. These draft laws in Belgium represent the continuation of the slippery slope that we've seen since the legalization in 2002. It started with a very modest proposal, it's continued and it's grown to the extent that we now see thousands and thousands of euthanasia deaths every single year, a number that's increased almost every single year since the legalization. My hope is that as the lawmakers look at these proposals, they will also look at the example that their country has set over the last 15 years or so. They will look at the number of cases which haven't been referred to the public prosecutor and wonder why there haven't been more, even from a statistical point of view. They'll look at the cases that have been exposed by the foreign media where the boundaries of the law have been pushed, one of which resulted in the first ever referral to the public prosecutor. And they'll look at the effect that these laws are having on society. They'll look at the unquestioning attitude of the media, and they will ask the hard questions that need to be asked. Are these laws good for patients? To which the answer has to be no. Are these laws good for doctors? To which the answer also has to be no. And ultimately, are these laws that are good for society? And we've seen the cost in Belgium.